France's cinematic response to Nazi occupation wasn't just art, it was resistance. From masterpieces shot during the actual war to modern revelations that exposed uncomfortable truths, these films forever transformed how we view conflict on screen. Did you know the French resistance actually used movie theaters as meeting spots for covert operations? Today, we're diving into the French war films that didn't just portray history. They changed how the entire world makes movies. Army of Shadows, 1969. The French resistance looked nothing like Hollywood wanted you to believe. Jean-Pierre Melville's brutal masterpiece depicts resistance fighters who operate in constant fear, not as glamorous heroes, but as exhausted, paranoid survivors. Based on Joseph Kessel's novel, this film was considered so controversial at release that French critics savaged it, and it wasn't even released in America until 2006, a staggering 37 years later. Melville himself fought in the actual resistance and refused to romanticize anything. In one gut-wrenching scene, members must execute one of their own who's been captured and might talk. They use their bare hands because a gunshot would alert the Nazis. The strangling is clumsy, desperate, and painfully long, the antithesis of quick Hollywood deaths. When finally screened in America, critics called it one of the greatest films ever made. Roger Ebert wrote it was as close to the reality of the resistance as we are likely to get. Melville's revolutionary choice to shoot in cold blues and grays, rather than warm tones, established a visual language for isolation that influenced everything from The Godfather to modern thrillers. Quentin Tarantino directly referenced it in *Inglourious Basterds*, proving its enduring impact. La Grande Illusion, 1937. Before the Second World War even began, Jean Renoir predicted its horrors with chilling accuracy. This anti-war masterpiece about WWII POWs was so powerful that when the Nazis invaded France, propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels declared it cinematic enemy number one and ordered every copy destroyed. The original negative was thought lost forever until it miraculously resurfaced in the 1990s. What made it so dangerous? Renoir dared to show German officers as human beings with honor, while simultaneously condemning the class systems that drive nations to war. The film crosses boundaries no one had attempted before, showing French, German, and Russian soldiers finding common humanity despite orders to hate each other. Orson Welles declared it one of the 2 movies he'd take to a desert island. When it premiered, President Franklin Roosevelt announced, "All democratic countries should see this film." The Nazis' determination to erase it backfired spectacularly. Film schools now teach it as the first truly modern war film, and its techniques for creating tension without violence revolutionized cinema. Every war movie that focuses on psychological battles over combat scenes owes a debt to Renoir's groundbreaking vision. Lhomme, Lucien, 1974. Louis Malle blew apart France's carefully constructed myths about national resistance with this deeply uncomfortable film. Its protagonist isn't heroic at all. He's Lucien, a young peasant who joins the Gestapo not from ideology, but simply because the resistance rejected him first. It portrays collaboration as something disturbingly casual, often done for petty reasons like settling personal scores or impressing girls. When released, French audiences were outraged. They'd spent decades telling themselves that most French citizens had heroically resisted occupation. Malle received death threats for suggesting many French people didn't just tolerate the Nazis, some eagerly helped them. The film's documentary-like style, with non-professional actors and natural lighting, made its morally ambiguous message feel even more authentic. François Truffaut called it the most honest portrait of France under occupation ever filmed. Its influence extended beyond cinema. Historians credit Lhomme, Lucien with forcing France to begin the painful process of acknowledging widespread collaboration. Stanley Kubrick reportedly studied Malle's uncomfortable close-ups for months before filming The Shining, adopting his technique of using faces to create unease rather than relying on dramatic music or editing. The Sorrow and the Pity, 1969. Marcel Ophuls didn't just make a documentary, he detonated a cultural bomb that fractured France's national identity. This 4.5-hour epic combines archival footage with painfully honest interviews of people who lived through the occupation. The French government found it so threatening, they banned it from television for over a decade, forcing people to watch it in small theaters, where they often left in tears or rage. What made it explosive? Ophuls directly challenged the Gaullist myth that France had been a nation of resistors. His interviews reveal shopkeepers who profited from German business, officials who enthusiastically enforced anti-Jewish laws, and ordinary citizens who looked away while neighbors disappeared. One former resistance fighter breaks down describing how French police were often more zealous at hunting Jews than the Germans. Legendary critic Pauline Kael wrote it was a movie that truly changes how you see the world. Its confrontational interview style, where subjects slowly reveal their complicity through seemingly casual questions, created a whole new documentary approach. Woody Allen even featured the film in Annie Hall as intellectual shorthand, showing how deeply it had penetrated cultural consciousness. Modern documentarians like Errol Morris cite it as the film that proved nonfiction could be more dramatically powerful than scripted stories. Au revoir les enfants, 1987. Louis Malle returned to the war with this semi-autobiographical gut punch based on an incident from his childhood that haunted him for decades. Set in a Catholic boarding school where priests hide Jewish children, the film builds to a moment when a young boy's glance accidentally betrays his Jewish classmate to Gestapo officers. That boy was Malle himself, and this film was his attempt at atonement. The genius lies in how ordinary everything feels until it suddenly isn't. There's no dramatic music when the Gestapo arrives, just the everyday sounds of a school suddenly interrupted. The Jewish boy doesn't make a dramatic speech when caught. He simply says, "Au revoir, les enfants," goodbye children, before being led away to his death. This understatement hit audiences like a sledgehammer. Gene Siskel confessed to breaking down sobbing during the screening. The film won the Golden Lion at Venice and fundamentally changed how filmmakers depict children in war movies. Before Malle, children in war films were usually symbols of innocence. After this, directors began showing them as complex moral agents who understand more than adults realize. Steven Spielberg cited it as a major influence on how he approached Holocaust scenes in Schindler's List, noting, "Malle showed you don't need to show violence to make viewers feel violated." Hiroshima, Mon Amour, 1959. Alain Resnais created the first film to directly link love and atomic destruction, shattering cinematic rules in the process, opening with documentary footage of Hiroshima bombing victims intercut with scenes of lovers' bodies. It drew immediate controversy. Japanese audiences were initially horrified at their tragedy being used as backdrop for a romance, while American distributors demanded cuts to graphic bombing aftermath scenes. The film's structure was revolutionary. Instead of linear storytelling, Resnais jumps between past and present, memory and reality. The French actress, never named, and her Japanese lover, also nameless, discuss trauma while their personal stories blur with collective historical wounds. "You saw nothing in Hiroshima," he tells her repeatedly, challenging whether outsiders can ever truly comprehend such horror. Critic Susan Sontag called it the birth of a new film language. Its fragmented narrative techniques directly influenced later works like Pulp Fiction and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Perhaps most importantly, it was the first major film to suggest that WWII's psychological damage extended far beyond Europe. Japanese director Akira Kurosawa admitted, "After seeing it, I realized cinema could express what was previously thought inexpressible." The film's innovative sound design, where dialogue sometimes continues across completely different visuals, created editing techniques still studied in film schools today. Night and Fog, 1956. Alain Resnais delivered the most horrifying 32 minutes in cinema history with this documentary short that French authorities tried desperately to suppress. Originally commissioned as an educational film about concentration camps, Resnais instead created something far more accusatory. He juxtaposes peaceful color footage of abandoned camps with stark black and white archival footage of atrocities, suggesting the past is never truly past. The French censorship board demanded cuts to any footage showing French police collaborating in deportations. When Resnais refused, they tried blocking international distribution. Their efforts failed spectacularly when it screened at Cannes and left audiences in stunned silence. One scene showing a mountain of women's hair collected by Nazis proved so unbearable that several viewers required medical attention. Film theorist André Bazin wrote, "No conventional Hollywood film about the camps has achieved 1/10 the power of these silent images. Its innovative technique of contrasting present-day tranquility with historical horror became standard practice in historical documentaries." Claude Lanzmann, director of Shoah, admitted, "I spent 9 hours trying to approach what Resnais accomplished in half an hour." Most significantly, Night and Fog was the first film to suggest the Holocaust wasn't a uniquely German crime, but required widespread European complicity, a perspective that sparked decades of painful national reckonings. The Last Metro, 1980. François Truffaut's masterpiece about a Parisian theater struggling to survive under Nazi occupation became France's highest-grossing film of 1980, despite tackling deeply uncomfortable truths. The story centers on an actress, Catherine Deneuve, hiding her Jewish husband in the theater basement while rehearsing a new play and navigating the advances of both Nazi officers and resistance members. What makes it revolutionary is how Truffaut uses the theater as metaphor for French survival strategies. Everyone performs different roles depending on who's watching. The film suggests most French citizens weren't heroes or villains, but pragmatic actors constantly adjusting their performances. In one brilliant scene, a critic who writes anti-Semitic reviews reveals he's actually helping the resistance by encoding messages in his articles. The film swept the César Awards, French Oscars, winning 10, including Best Film. Critic Vincent Canby noted its most radical achievement was making occupation seem frighteningly normal. Truffaut shows how people adapt to horror until it becomes everyday life. Its influence extends beyond war films. Modern series like The Americans and Homeland borrowed its technique of showing how maintaining dual identities during conflict creates unbearable psychological pressure. The film's visual motif of characters speaking through walls and floors created a new visual language for depicting life under surveillance. Forbidden Games, 1952. René Clément delivered the most devastating child's perspective on war ever filmed and created an international scandal in the process. Following two children who create a pet cemetery after witnessing the horrors of war, the film was initially rejected by the Cannes Film Festival for being too disturbing. When finally screened, its brutal opening sequence, showing a German plane strafing refugees and killing a child's parents, caused walkouts and fainting. The film's power comes from showing war entirely through children's eyes. The young orphan Paulette doesn't understand death, but becomes obsessed with collecting dead animals, while her friend Michelle steals crosses from the church cemetery to mark their graves. Their innocent logic creates an increasingly macabre ritual that serves as perfect metaphor for war's absurdity. When it finally reached America, it won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Film and fundamentally changed how children were portrayed in war cinema. Director Steven Spielberg revealed, "This film taught me children don't need to understand war to be its most honest witnesses." Its controversial score by Narciso Yepes, featuring seemingly inappropriate playful guitar during tragic scenes, pioneered the now common technique of using contrapuntal music to heighten emotional impact. Most importantly, it was among the first films to suggest that war traumatizes children in ways adults cannot comprehend or repair. The Silence of the Sea, 1949. Jean-Pierre Melville's directorial debut was as controversial for how it was made as for what it showed. Shot illegally without permits and with borrowed equipment, it adapts Vercors' underground resistance novella about a French man and his niece who protest German occupation through complete silence, refusing to speak to the German officer billeted in their home. What made it revolutionary? The film consists largely of monologues by the German officer who speaks into silence. He's cultured, loves French literature, and opposes Nazi ideology. completely contradicting standard villainous portrayal of Germans in post-war films. More shocking still, the French protagonist's silent resistance ultimately fails to affect anything, suggesting most civilian resistance was ultimately futile. When screened for actual resistance members, including the author Vercors, many were outraged by the sympathetic German character. Vercors eventually gave his blessing, admitting, "It captures the moral complexity we didn't want to acknowledge." Martin Scorsese cites its minimalist technique as a major influence, noting, "Melville proved you could make a powerful film about war without showing a single battle. Its pioneering use of voiceover to reveal thoughts characters cannot express influenced generations of filmmakers, and its suggestion that occupation created moral gray areas rather than clear heroes and villains fundamentally changed war narratives." The Red Balloon, 1956. Albert Lamouris created what appears to be a charming children's fable about a boy and his magical balloon, but French audiences immediately recognized its deeper significance. Shot in the bomb-damaged neighborhoods of Ménilmontant and Belleville, the film's seemingly innocent story about a red balloon that follows a lonely boy through Paris streets actually functions as powerful allegory for France's post-war recovery. What viewers often miss is the deliberately war-ravaged setting. The boy, Pascal, navigates streets still showing visible damage from Allied bombing. The balloon's bright red color against gray ruins symbolizes hope persisting after devastation. When other children destroy the balloon in the film's climactic scene, hundreds of other balloons from across Paris come to rescue Pascal, a clear metaphor for the Marshall Plan and European solidarity. The film won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay despite having almost no dialogue. Steven Spielberg called it the most perfect short film ever made. Its innovative techniques for filming the balloon's movements required technology Lamouris invented himself. Most significantly, it pioneered the use of children's perspectives to address war trauma indirectly, creating a new cinematic language for discussing painful subjects with younger audiences. Its influence extends to modern films like Pan's Labyrinth and Beasts of the Southern Wild, which similarly use magical realism to help children process historical trauma. Is Paris Burning? 1966. René Clément assembled the most impressive international cast of its era for this massive black-and-white epic about Hitler's orders to destroy Paris before retreat. With stars including Orson Welles, Kirk Douglas, Glenn Ford, Jean-Paul Belmondo, and Alain Delon, the production was so enormous that Paris officials allowed Clément to remove modern street signs and temporarily replace them with Nazi-era versions, causing tourists to believe the occupation had somehow returned. What makes it groundbreaking is its documentary approach to dramatic material. Clément insisted on filming at actual locations where events occurred, sometimes capturing scenes on the exact anniversary of the historical events. For authenticity, he hired many non-actors who had participated in the actual liberation of Paris, including resistance members who found themselves recreating their own dangerous missions. President Charles de Gaulle was so concerned about the film's portrayal of French collaboration that he personally reviewed the script and demanded changes. The film's most controversial achievement was acknowledging that Paris was saved not by Allied forces or resistance fighters alone, but partly through negotiations with a German general who disobeyed Hitler's destruction orders. This nuanced view challenged both American and French myth-making about liberation. Christopher Nolan studied its large-scale urban warfare sequences extensively before filming Dunkirk, adopting its technique of maintaining geographic clarity during chaotic street battles. Lorbo the Raven, 1943. Henri-Georges Clouzot made the most dangerous film of the occupation, one that got him labeled both Nazi collaborator and resistance sympathizer. Produced by a German-controlled studio during the occupation, this thriller about poison pen letters spreading paranoia through a small French town was viewed by everyone as an allegory for something different. Nazis approved it, thinking it criticized French informants reporting to the resistance, while resistance members read it as condemnation of French citizens informing to the Gestapo. The film's genius lies in its deliberate ambiguity. It shows how quickly accusation becomes evidence and how easily communities turn against each other. After liberation, Clouseau was tried for collaboration and banned from filmmaking for several years. The ultimate irony, years later, resistance members admitted they secretly screened the film to teach citizens about the dangers of informing. Film noir pioneer Alfred Hitchcock called it the perfect thriller, and borrowed its techniques for Shadow of a Doubt. Its uncompromising portrayal of mob psychology influenced everything from The Crucible to modern witch hunt narratives. Most importantly, it remains cinema's most honest portrayal of occupation's moral compromises, made by someone living through them in real time. Modern critics recognize it as perhaps the most subversive act of filmmaking during the entire war, hiding criticism of totalitarianism within a film approved by totalitarians themselves. The Train, 1964. John Frankenheimer took over this production after original director Arthur Penn was fired, creating what Roger Ebert called the best pure action film about World War II. Based on the true story of French railway workers who prevented Nazis from transporting stolen art masterpieces to Germany, the film stars Burt Lancaster as a reluctant resistance member who initially questions risking lives for paintings. What separates it from typical Hollywood war films is its moral complexity. The French protagonist argues that no painting is worth human life, while a museum curator insists French cultural heritage must be preserved at any cost. The film's most powerful innovation was shooting the railway sequences with full-size trains. No models or miniatures. When you see explosions and crashes, those are actual locomotives being destroyed, creating an authenticity that CGI still can't match. French critics praised it for acknowledging that most resistance members weren't fighting for abstract ideals, but protecting specific things they loved. The film's influence extends beyond war movies. Its precisely choreographed action sequences, especially the switchyard battle, directly inspired similar scenes in The French Connection and later The Dark Knight. Most significantly, it was among the first American productions to acknowledge that French civilians often paid the highest price for resistance activities, with one devastated village scene so realistic that elderly French extras who had lived through the war broke down during filming. The Two of Us, 1967. Claude Berry turned his own childhood experiences into this disarmingly funny film about a Jewish boy sent to live with an elderly couple in rural France to escape persecution. The twist? The old man, brilliantly played by Michel Simon, is a devoted anti-Semite who has no idea his young charge is Jewish. What could have been tragic becomes unexpectedly hilarious as the boy navigates the old man's prejudices while forming a deep bond with him. The film's radical achievement is showing how personal connections can overcome ideology. When the boy accidentally reveals himself in the bath, the old man's face shows a complex transformation as he reconciles his love for the child with his lifelong prejudices. This scene alone revolutionized how films portray the process of overcoming bigotry, not through dramatic speeches, but through quiet personal revelations. François Truffaut called it the most honest portrayal of how children experience the war. Its influence extended beyond war films to buddy comedies that pair characters with seemingly incompatible worldviews. Most importantly, it was among the first films to suggest that France's wartime experience wasn't uniformly urban or dramatic. For many children sent to the countryside, it was a strange mixture of fear, boredom, and unexpected joy. Robin Williams cited it as direct inspiration for his performance in Jacob the Liar, noting, "Barry showed that finding humor during darkness isn't disrespectful, it's how people survive." Monsieur Klein, 1976. Joseph Losey created the most nightmarish Kafka-esque vision of occupation with this psychological thriller starring Alain Delon as a Catholic art dealer who profits from buying Jewish property at fraction of its value. When he receives a Jewish newspaper addressed to another Robert Klein, his comfortable life unravels as authorities begin suspecting he might be Jewish himself. His increasingly desperate attempts to prove his pure French heritage lead him deeper into a bureaucratic labyrinth. The film's brilliant conceit shows how the machinery of persecution can consume anyone. As Klein searches for his Jewish doppelganger, he begins experiencing the same persecution he previously ignored. The final devastating scene shows him being rounded up in the WWII raids despite his protests of mistaken identity, based on the actual 1942 mass arrest of 13,000 Jews in Paris. French critics initially dismissed it as too stylized, but it won the César for Best Film. Stanley Kubrick cited it as perfect example of bureaucratic terror, influencing his approach in The Shining. Its most lasting innovation was showing occupation through the eyes of a morally compromised protagonist rather than heroic resistors or innocent victims. This perspective shift created a new framework for examining complicity that influenced later films like The Lives of Others. Most significantly, it was the first major film to directly address the WWII roundup, breaking decades of silence about French police's role in mass deportations. So, which of these films do you think had the biggest impact on cinema history? The French didn't just document their wartime experience, they revolutionized how stories about conflict are told. While Hollywood was making straightforward hero narratives, French directors were asking uncomfortable questions about collaboration, resistance, and moral gray areas that we're still grappling with today. Have you seen any of these classics? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And here's a question that still divides film historians. Did French cinema's unflinching examination of national shame ultimately heal the country's war wounds, or just reopen them?